And Sullivan, as you know, has been outside the White House for the better part of the day leading up to this meeting. Is this, Brian, exactly what that is, a sales pitch from the president to?
The White House meeting involving Donald Trump and oil executives turned chaotic and revealing, shedding light on both the administration's approach to international oil politics and internal decision-making.
And if you look, come to think of it, well, I got to look at this myself.
During this gathering, Trump's discussions ranged from Venezuela's oil resources to the construction of his proposed Golden Ballroom in the East Wing, with reporters being asked to leave for private deliberations.
We'll see what kind of a deal we're going to make with these geniuses, and I think you're going to come out very good. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
The event exposed moments of confusion, self-aggrandizement, and controversial policy statements. From threats of geopolitical interventions to discussions about Nobel Peace Prizes, the meeting offered an unusual glimpse into Trump's style of governance, his interaction with executives, and his perspective on global affairs, leaving observers questioning both strategy and decorum. Trump's private meeting with oil executives. During this meeting, Trump's decision to ask the press to leave set the tone for a highly secretive discussion with oil executives, particularly about Venezuela. By insisting on privacy, he made it clear that the conversation was meant to occur away from public scrutiny, allowing for candid and perhaps ethically questionable exchanges. His language was casual, yet transactional, hinting that support for his personal projects, like the Golden Ballroom, might be tied to access to Venezuela's oil. Trump's habit of addressing executives by company rather than personal names suggested both familiarity and a strategic, impersonal approach to business relations. This moment revealed a blending of public office and private interests, where personal gain seemed intertwined with foreign policy objectives. It showcased a leadership style focused more on negotiation and deal-making than on transparency or diplomatic norms, leaving observers questioning the propriety of mixing national resource strategy with private incentives. The Golden Ballroom reference. Trump's repeated references to his Golden Ballroom emphasized both his fascination with personal grandeur and his tendency to connect private projects to public policy. He described it as a massive undertaking in the East Wing and implied that executives who supported it could benefit from his Venezuela initiatives. This remark reflected a broader pattern in which personal ambitions and state matters were intertwined, making it difficult to separate official responsibilities from private gain. Discussions included details about architectural design and expansion plans for the West Wing, further highlighting his preoccupation with visual symbols of power and prestige. Linking the ballroom to oil negotiations illustrated his transactional mindset, treating diplomacy and corporate engagement as avenues for personal advancement. It also highlighted how physical monuments or symbolic projects became part of his political strategy, with personal interest shaping conversations that would normally require professional detachment and ethical restraint. Interaction with the press. Trump's engagement with reporters during the meeting was abrupt and theatrical, reflecting his tendency to dominate the narrative. Before moving into private discussions, he asked the press to leave, emphasizing secrecy as necessary for the forthcoming conversation. This act demonstrated his desire to control both the flow of information and the environment in which decisions were made. By explicitly referring to the discussion as about carving up Venezuela, he blurred ethical and legal boundaries, framing diplomacy in transactional and informal terms. The moment highlighted a pattern where public performance and private decision-making overlapped, allowing him to maintain the appearance of authority while excluding independent scrutiny. It underscored how Trump prioritized strategic advantage and deal-making over transparency, reinforcing the perception of governance as a negotiable game rather than a structured, accountable process. Referring to executives by companies. Trump's habit of calling executives by company names, such as Mr. Chevron or Mr. Exxon, revealed a transactional and impersonal approach to professional relationships. This behavior suggested he viewed corporate identity as more important than personal connection, treating individuals as representatives of business interests rather than autonomous actors. By framing interactions as corporate transactions, he emphasized tangible outcomes over formal protocol or traditional diplomacy. This also reflected a casual, sometimes careless style of engagement, where personal familiarity or social niceties were secondary to strategic advantage. By reducing people to their company roles, Trump underscored a worldview where relationships were instruments to achieve policy goals or personal gain. This approach highlighted his preference for immediate results and practical negotiation over nuanced understanding, personal rapport, or ethical considerations, reinforcing his image as a deal-oriented, transactional leader. Conversations about Nobel Peace Prizes. Trump's comments connecting Nobel Peace Prizes to Venezuela's leadership revealed a misunderstanding of international norms and symbolic awards. He suggested that if opposition leader Maria Corina Machado gave him her Nobel recognition, he might consider assigning her a political role, reflecting a personalistic approach to governance. This conflation of personal accolades and foreign policy decisions blurred the line between ego and statecraft. By presenting awards as instruments of influence, he treated formal honors as negotiable tools, misunderstanding their rules and significance. The remarks also exposed his focus on prestige and symbolic gestures as a form of leverage, intertwining personal recognition with geopolitical strategy. This instance illustrated a broader pattern in which Trump often allowed personal narratives and self-aggrandizement to influence decision-making, creating uncertainty about the seriousness, legality, or logic of the policies being discussed. Exxon executive's perspective. The Exxon executive offered a grounded and realistic assessment of Venezuela, highlighting the country's instability and the challenges of making investments there without significant U.S. support or protection. This perspective contrasted sharply with Trump's casual optimism about Venezuelan oil, showing the gap between corporate realities and political aspirations. The executive emphasized the need for durable legal frameworks, investment protections, and security guarantees, conditions that were not being addressed in Trump's discussion. By highlighting these requirements, the executive underscored the complexity of doing business in authoritarian regimes and the risks involved in politically motivated interventions. This moment illustrated how corporate pragmatism often clashes with the transactional and ambitious style of Trump's foreign policy, emphasizing that meaningful engagement requires careful planning and risk assessment rather than casual enthusiasm or personal leverage. Contradictions about Venezuelan oil. Trump's shifting statements about Venezuelan oil, from calling it very good to later describing it as garbage, highlighted inconsistency and a lack of technical understanding. These contradictory remarks reflected a reliance on political framing and narrative control rather than on accurate information or analysis. Such inconsistencies likely created confusion for both executives and the public about his administration's actual policy or approach. This pattern revealed a transactional approach, where statements about resources or policy were flexible depending on context, audience, or immediate objectives. By shifting positions, Trump reinforced the perception that decisions were guided less by factual understanding and more by opportunity, personal gain, or rhetorical convenience, demonstrating how fluid and unpredictable his messaging on economic and foreign policy issues could be. Threats toward Greenland. Trump's comments about Greenland, including threats of intervention to prevent Russian or Chinese influence, illustrated an impulsive and transactional approach to global geopolitics. His rhetoric combined casual language with aggressive policy claims, presenting complex international issues in oversimplified terms. By framing territories as strategic assets rather than sovereign nations, Trump emphasized a combative style of diplomacy rooted in perceived self-interest. The statement reflected a readiness to act unilaterally, prioritizing strategic advantage over formal negotiation or alliance building. It highlighted the unpredictable nature of his foreign policy, where personal interpretation of threats and opportunities shaped public messaging and potential action. This moment illustrated how casual, informal communication could carry real geopolitical implications, blending performance with policy in ways that blurred the line between rhetoric and intent. Controversial claims about assets. Trump's repeated claims that Venezuela had stolen U.S. assets, likened to taking from babies, demonstrated a hyperbolic, emotionally charged framing of complex international disputes. This analogy simplified a nuanced legal and historical situation into a narrative of victimhood and wrongdoing. By portraying the U.S. as exploited and vulnerable, he justified aggressive interventionist rhetoric and policy positions. His framing revealed a broader strategy of blending emotional appeal with nationalistic messaging, emphasizing perceived losses and injustices to validate actions and policies. The comments highlighted his focus on narrative control and public perception over technical accuracy, showing a pattern of using rhetorical tools to justify strategic moves and influence audience interpretation of international events. False claims about elections. Trump's assertion that he won Minnesota 3 times exemplified his tendency to spread misinformation about electoral outcomes. Presenting unverified claims as fact reinforced his narrative of political dominance and voter manipulation by opponents. This approach served multiple purposes. It bolstered support among loyalists, delegitimized opposition, and framed himself as a wronged or cheated figure. The statement reflected a broader pattern in which personal narrative and political ambition guided public messaging, often at the expense of factual accuracy. By altering historical or verified records to fit his objectives, Trump demonstrated a transactional and performative approach to politics, where perception and influence outweighed adherence to truth or accountability. Remarks on domestic security. Trump's endorsement of J.D. Vance's statements about Renee Nicole Good further illustrated his transactional approach to governance. By labeling her as part of a left-wing network without evidence, he reinforced a narrative that aligned with ideological allies and law and order rhetoric. He described her as a professional agitator, delegitimizing dissent while emphasizing the importance of security and authority. This moment highlighted his use of public authority to shape narratives around domestic threats and opposition, blending personal opinion, media framing, and policy messaging. It underscored a governance style heavily reliant on performative authority, where symbolic gestures, selective enforcement, and narrative control played central roles in maintaining political power and public perception.